Welcome to the debate. We're continuing our series that really digs into educating contractors on how to apply the principles taught by Latif to master the art of maximizing insurance claim supplements. This isn't just about recovering costs, it's the strategic heart of building a sustainable, profitable business.
It really is. And I think we can assume that anyone listening already gets it. They're past the point of just passively accepting whatever initial estimate gets thrown at them. They know that the difference between just getting by and truly scaling their company, it often comes down to having a really rigorous supplement system in place.
Exactly. The ROI is just astronomical. And that success, it forces a really critical strategic choice. This is what we're debating today. Should contractors prioritize maximizing the dollar value of every single claim? By rigorously going after the complex, high-friction items like overhead and profit, technical safety requirements, or should they focus on maximizing the volume and the speed of approvals by streamlining everything for the easy, high approval items?
And I'll be arguing that, for sustainable, scalable profit, you've got to prioritize that volume and minimize the friction. It's all about speed.
And I'm going to contend that true transformational profit, the kind that lets you build real systems and invest in quality, it requires demanding every legitimate dollar you're owed, even if that means you have to face a little bit of resistance.
I understand the logic there. I do. Pursue every dollar. But let me offer a different way of looking at it. Maximum annual profit, at the end of the day, isn't achieved by winning these long, drawn-out battles on a couple of big claims. It's achieved through consistent, fast approvals on every single claim that's moving through your pipeline. These complex, high-friction items, like trying to justify 20% O&P on a standard roof job, they just immediately trigger red flags.
Which is why the documentation has to be perfect.
Right. But even with perfect documentation, you're slowing down the desk adjuster. And these are people who are judged on efficiency, on volume. When you overload them with things that require a ton of negotiation, you're just creating a bottleneck. And for a contractor trying to scale, those bottlenecks are chillers. Our strategy is about making approval the path of least resistance. We focus on those low-friction items backed by objective, easily verifiable data. Clear building codes, photos of hidden damage, using the adjuster's own higher measurements.
I'd frame that a little differently by really focusing on the transformative impact of going for that higher value. So think about a smaller, efficient contractor. Maybe they do 50 jobs a year. If they take a conservative, say, $2,500 average supplement, that's an extra $125,000. Good. But if they really maximize the scope and push that average up to $3,500, now they're adding $175,000. That extra 50 grand, that flows almost entirely to net profit. That's not marginal. That's what lets you double your profit.
But you're risking the guaranteed $2,500 by fighting for that extra $1,000. You're slowing down cash flow.
But that extra value is often found in the non-negotiable costs of just running a compliant business. Latif's principles teach contractors to boss up, right? It means you know your worth and you document every expense based on codes and the actual scope. This includes things like federal compliance costs, project manager supervision, lab super in Xactimate. That's not some optional markup. It's often required by OSHA, like Rule 1926.502H for steep slope work. If it's a code-mandated cost, it is owed, period. It doesn't matter what the adjuster's volume targets are.
I'm not saying they aren't legitimate costs, but the strategy is how and when you deploy those arguments. The teamwork mentality we teach is all about building a professional rapport that speeds things up. By prioritizing supplements that are clean, clear, focusing on things like IRC 905.2.85 for drip edge, or clear photos of an unavailable surface on the decking, you avoid confrontational words like rot. We just get consistent, fast approvals. The goal is optimizing the annual cash flow, not squeezing every last cent out of one job at the expense of time.
Okay, so let's dig into that because this is our first real point of contention, the necessity of including those overhead and safety costs. You mentioned LA Super O&O and O&P. I think it's important we clarify the difference. General overhead and profit, or O&P, that covers the fixed cost of your business, the office, insurance, accounting. Xactimate's unit prices do not include that. Job overhead, like that project manager's supervision, that's site-specific, the porta-john, the safety supervisor required by OSHA.
Exactly.
Well, if Xactimate itself says its prices are a baseline, not a ceiling, and we know that baseline excludes O and P, then leaving it off, especially on a multi-trade job where it's standard, means the contractor is operating at a structural loss. This isn't about being greedy. It's just accepted accounting. Why should a small interior repair that triggers, say, $4,590 in O&P for coordinating trades be sacrificed just to avoid a conversation? I mean, operating unsustainably for the sake of speed is a strategic failure.
See, that's where I fundamentally disagree. It's not a structural failure to omit O&P on a simple, single trade claim. It's a calculated trade-off. We've shown that spending, 45 minutes on a clean supplement can get you $2,500 approved. The ROI on that is insane. It's over $3,000 an hour. The second you introduce O&P or heavy job overhead on a routine job, you move that claim out of the fast lane and into the negotiation queue. That can easily add 1 or 2 weeks to your approval time. For a contractor who needs working capital, giving up 2 weeks of cash flow for a few $100 in O&P is just, it's fiscally irresponsible.
I'm just not convinced by that, because I think you risk setting a precedent, a long-term precedent, of accepting less than you're owed. When you constantly submit claims without essential compliance costs, like that mandatory safety supervision, you're telling the insurance industry that those items are optional. But we're presenting what is required by federal law. Avoiding that conversation because you're afraid of looking greedy, that's exactly what keeps contractors trapped in a low-margin business model. If the documentation is there, citing the specific OSHA reg, the obligation to pay is clear.
The obligation to pay might be clear, but the process of getting paid is not. Look, we use O&P, but we reserve it strictly for the truly complex multi-trade jobs where coordination is just undeniable. For everything else, we maximize profit through volume and low friction. If you can get 10 claims approved in the time it takes you to negotiate full O&P on 3, your annual profit curve just looks dramatically better with the volume model.
Okay, but even if we could agree on what to include, the way we present that information, the documentation itself, that's another area where our strategies really seem to diverge.
Agreed. For me, it's all about making the approval scannable. Desk adjusters look at dozens of these things a day. They need supplements in an Xactimate format, perfectly organized into folders like roofing accessories or hidden damage. The email lineout has to be concise. The justification, almost telegraphic. Drip edge replacement, IRC 905.2.85 requires it. That's it. This simple, hyper-organized presentation gets an approval in 48 to 72 hours. That's how you maximize volume.
That efficiency is vital, I'll give you that. But high-value supplements, they demand a level of stacked justification. I call it the triple lock, or for the biggest ticket items, the 5 layers. A simple code citation works for drip edge, sure. But what about when you're justifying something that significantly increases the claim value, like extensive ice and water shield? You need that layered approach. The triple lock means you cite 1, the building code. 2, the manufacturer specification, because the code itself often requires you follow it. And 3, pre-loss condition photos, proving it was there to begin with. Without all 3, you give the adjuster an easy excuse to say no.
I see why you'd emphasize that. But there's a real risk of over-documentation. So many contractors try this, and they just send a zip file with 200 disorganized photos and a long, rambling email. It's totally counterproductive. The adjuster sees that, thinks this is a time sink, and immediately sends it to some internal review team, delaying payment by weeks. Professionalism means the complexity is in your inspection, not your presentation. The final package has to be synthesized down. Decking replacement, unavailable surface, see photos 20 through 27. They don't need the whole novel. They just need the chapter and verse.
I absolutely accept the need for organization, but oversimplification risks losing the big wins. Take discontinued materials. That's a major high-value item. It can add $16,000 or more to a claim if you can justify a full replacement. You can't just cite a code for that. You have to stack all 5 layers: the ITEL report confirming it's discontinued, the code that supports replacement for aesthetic reasons, the manufacturer's warranty, an aesthetic justification memo, and finally, a sourcing log showing you try to find a match. If you prioritize speed and use a simple presentation there, you are leaving $16,000 on the table.
That $16,000 win is a compelling example, but it's a niche scenario. My position is focused on the 90% of claims that are routine. Let's perfect the system for that 90% first, ensure we've got maximum volume and speed, and only use the 5-layer strategy when the claim value really justifies that huge time investment, which is probably less than 5% of your files. For most contractors, that consistent volume is way more profitable over a year than these high-stakes, time-consuming documentation battles.
Which brings us to our final point of tension: how we approach the human element, what you call the teamwork mentality versus what I see as just relying on documented, objective credibility.
And I believe that teamwork mentality is absolutely crucial for scaling. It's about professional collaboration, not being best friends. The desk adjuster isn't your enemy. They're a gatekeeper who values efficiency. So our strategy involves explicitly acknowledging their quick approvals. Hey, thanks for approving the IWS so quickly. That really helps us out. And just maintaining a respectful tone even when you're negotiating. It encourages them to trust you. And that trust is what accelerates all your future approvals because they learn your documentation is solid.
I see that, but that calculation, it overlooks the immediate compromise on value. Credibility in this process, it has to be built on verifiable evidence, not just a pleasant phone call. As Latif emphasizes, the contractors who really succeed, they aren't the loudest or the most aggressive. They're the ones who show up with the unassailable documentation. If you immediately back down on a legitimate lab supercharge to maintain rapport, you're signaling that you're willing to compromise on safety just to be agreeable. Credibility is earned when your documentation is so airtight that negotiation becomes pointless.
That's a fair point, but I'd argue true professionalism means understanding the adjuster's incentives. When an item gets denied, the collaborative approach isn't to just roll over. It's a strategic question. Instead of getting defensive and just citing the code again, you ask, how can we best document this specific $500 cost for the safety supervisor to meet your compliance needs, to show it's a required cost, not an optional markup? You see, it reframes the whole thing from a fight over money into a shared process challenge, which is much easier for an adjuster to solve.
But does that actually maximize what you're paid? Or does it just maximize the speed of getting paid 90% of what you're owed? If the evidence, the stack documentation, the ITL report, the OSHA citation is already there, then the focus has to stay on the evidence. I worry that prioritizing the adjuster's comfort level just leads to accepting less than the full, rightful scope, and that ultimately hurts the contractor's growth.
Well, it's about maximizing the annual return. For most businesses, high volume provides the predictable cash flow you need to hire, to market, to expand. The aggressive pursuit strategy might get a higher average claim value, sure, but the time cost, measured in weeks of delay across dozens of claims, can drastically reduce the total revenue you actually realize in a fiscal year. We have to perfect the system for the 80% of claims where the gain from speed vastly outweighs the marginal dollar gain from friction.
Well, this discussion really underscores the critical choices contractors have to make once they start applying Latif's principles. I mean, passive acceptance of initial estimates is financial suicide. We agree on that. But the path forward requires these tactical decisions. Contractors must leverage technical requirements, codes, manufacturer specs, justified labor to make sure they are fully compensated. That high-value posture, I believe, is essential for high-profit growth.
I remain convinced that for most businesses trying to scale, risking rapport and approval speed for marginal gains on contested items is just too high a risk. You have to focus first on perfecting the end-to-end system, the 8-step supplement system, to ensure you're getting maximum volume and high approval rates on those low-friction, high ROI items. Consistency, professionalism, and scannable documentation, that's the quickest route to maximizing annual revenue.
Thank you for really illuminating both sides of this. Whether a contractor prioritizes the maximum dollar per claim or the volume of fast approvals, the foundation is the same: thorough inspection, comprehensive documentation, and the confidence to present what you are owed.
And we hope this discussion has deepened your understanding of the strategic choices you have when applying Latif supplement principles. We really encourage listeners to explore the content further to master the techniques behind the strategies we talked about today.
Tune in next time for the next chapter in this series, where we'll continue to explore practical applications and even more advanced supplement strategies.